Hello, I'm Felicity Minch. This program is about a Carnegie Library, its history, how it changed with changing times, and how it's being used today. Andrew Carnegie funded many of these library buildings across America, which helped to create a system of free public libraries.
Steel magnate Andrew Carnegie had been influenced by industrialist Peter Cooper, benefactor of the Cooper Union in New York City. Cooper created a trade school where anyone could receive a free education. Carnegie followed that example, funding construction of 2,509 libraries throughout the English-speaking world. Of these, 1,679 were built in the United States. While Carnegie believed wealth in the hands of a few was needed to sustain a democracy, he also believed the wealthy should pay back the society that enabled them to gain wealth. Carnegie was largely self-taught from books he borrowed from Colonel James Anderson. Anderson had a small library of books which he loaned to local boys on Saturday afternoons. Carnegie had worked long hours in hard jobs as a youth with no access to education. He believed boys and girls needed free access to books to educate themselves and should share cultural opportunities on a basis of equality. Since he had been born in Scotland in 1835, he also believed free libraries gave immigrants a way to acquire a cultural knowledge of America. Carnegie believed he who dies rich dies disgraced, and he wrote a gospel of wealth that would influence other philanthropy.
Longmont's Carnegie Library was much celebrated back when it was built in 1912, and it served as the town's public library for 60 years. But it was a much different situation by 1992, when the building faced moving or demolition for a new library expansion project. The City Landmarks Commission at the time was caught in the middle of the drama.
Removal of historic buildings was not consistent with goal number 4 of the city's comprehensive plan or with City Ordinance number 1112 of 1971 or with City Ordinance 1450 of 1976. From the start, Chapter 2.56 of the City Municipal Code had created a process to protect and preserve areas of historic, architectural, or geographic importance. The ordinance had been updated in 1983, and at the end of Section 2.56.010 about purpose, it stated, "It is the opinion of the City Council that the economic, cultural, and aesthetic standing of this city cannot be maintained or enhanced by disregarding the historical, architectural, and geographic heritage of this city and by ignoring the destruction or defacement of such cultural assets." Longmont had become a certified local government, or CLG, which gave it a special importance and funding status for grants. It was important to preserve that reputation with the state by the proper management of historic buildings. One part of proper management in this case was specified by the Secretary of the Interior's Standards for Rehabilitation, which had been adopted by the City Council as part of the CLG agreement. The standards advised against the moving of historic buildings. The Carnegie Library was discussed again in a study session on December 10th, as reported in a Daily Times Call story the following day titled, "Carnegie to Move for Project." The city manager and his deputy then rushed a council communication for a consent agenda item for the next council meeting on December 17th, which stated, "Staff recommends that the Carnegie Library will be relocated or demolished. Funding for the renovation and reuse of the building for city functions does not exist." The council was asked to table the item, saying there was no reason to rush a decision on the Carnegie, but only one person in attendance spoke in opposition. After a short discussion, the City Council then voted in favor of the staff recommendation 3-2 with 2 members absent. The city offered to sell the Carnegie Library building for $1 to anyone willing to move it. The city would throw in $30,000 for moving costs, but no one fell for the idea.
With the lack of support for preserving the Longmont Carnegie Library, a citizens group was being formed to do what the city government itself was not able to achieve. And a petition drive was being organized to present an alternative proposal that had public support.
In April of 1992, a coalition was organized named CORE, Citizens Opposed to Removal of Public Structures, to work toward preservation of the Carnegie Library in its present location. A nomination to list the building in the National Register of Historic Places was submitted to the State Office of Archaeology and Historic Preservation in Denver on May 9th. Since Longmont was a CLG certified local government, the Landmark Commission voted unanimously on June 4, 1992, that the building is eligible for listing in the National Register under Criterion A and C. The City Council, however, decided to send a letter to the Colorado Historical Society in opposition to the nomination. Since the Carnegie Library was a publicly owned structure, the nomination went forward because it had been approved by the Commission. If it was privately owned, the nomination would have gone forward for a determination of eligibility only. The question asking for an opinion about this went all the way to Washington, D.C. The State Historic Preservation Review Board voted unanimously to recommend listing the Longmont Carnegie Library in the National Register, as reported in a July 18, 1992 newspaper story titled, "A Landmark Decision," and the nomination went forward. The Carnegie Building was ultimately kept on site by a 4-3 vote by the Council in February of 1994. Longmont's 1912 Carnegie Library still stands amid the taller library structure built in the early 1990s. It remains in the keyhole notch with the newer structure wrapped around it.
The notion that Andrew Carnegie wanted his name on the buildings he funded is untrue. But he did ask that there should be placed over the entrance of the libraries I build a representation of the rays of the sun, and above, "Let there be light." Thanks for watching.